Jeanette, you are going to be in charge of letting people in as soon as I hit the admit all button, which is right now.
Got it.
Okay, just a reminder, don't forget the closed captioning.
Captioning is available to anybody who wants to turn it on.
Let's start YouTube. Start YouTube.
It's on. Well, good morning, everybody. We are right at 10 o'clock, our start time, so we'll get going here. Thank you for making some time out of your day to join us for the Space Management Policy Town Hall. For those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet, either virtually or in person, my name is Todd Gilchrist. I'm the Vice President of University Services, Operations, and Finance, and I am the executive sponsor for this particular initiative. I'm joined today by Ashley Badia, our Associate Vice President of Infrastructure Planning, Development, and Partnerships, and several members of Ashley's team. We would like to welcome you to the Space Management Policy Town Hall. And before we get going today, I would like to start with a territorial acknowledgement. University of Alberta acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory and respects the histories, languages, and cultures of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, and all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our vibrant community. Just a few housekeeping items. I know we are all very well versed in virtual meetings nowadays, but I noted this morning it has been some time since I've done a town hall, so these are good reminders for me, if not for you. Do encourage you to keep your camera on throughout the town hall. It's always good to be able to see people's faces. However, I will note that this session is being recorded, so feel free to turn off your camera if that is more comfortable for you. A link to the recording will be posted on the Space Management Policy webpage following the meeting. Please do keep your microphone muted for the duration of the presentation. And to ask questions during the discussion period following the presentation, please use your raise hand icon in Zoom. So that's in the reaction bar at the bottom of your screen, and we'll keep tabs on the order, and we'll ask you to ask your question. Also, feel free to type any questions that you might have into the chat. We'll take a look just here at the agenda, and then we'll move on to meet the team. But it's this town hall. With this town hall, we're kicking off our consultation process on the space management policy, and we want to begin by providing you with an overview of the space management policy. We're going to include key elements and principles that will be addressed in the revised policy. We'll talk about the need to revise the policy, why now, what it's going to mean to you and your colleagues, how it connects to the university's strategic landscape, and the One University model. We'll also talk about the policy development process and timeline. As I mentioned earlier, we will be happy to answer any questions that you may have during the session. As well, there will be an opportunity for follow-up questions afterwards. I'm now going to turn things over to Ashley to get into more detail. So Ashley, over to you.
Thanks, Todd. As Todd mentioned, I'm Ashley Batia, Associate Vice President, Infrastructure Planning, Development, and Partnerships, and I'm project sponsor for this initiative. Several key members of my team are here to capture input and help answer any questions to maybe ask them to give a wave. Joanne Bortnick, Director of Strategic Infrastructure Planning and Partnerships, Jacqueline McLeod, Head of Strategic Infrastructure Planning, Anthea Lakis and Kyle Tu, strategic infrastructure planners, and Azel Calder, strategic infrastructure coordinator. So next slide, please. Okay, the purpose of the policy. University space is a shareable resource encompassing university buildings, lands, and infrastructure. Effective management of space allows us to meet the needs of the university community and progress our core mission. So the space management policy defines university space and outlines responsibilities and accountabilities for space management and administration across the university, as well as establishing principles that align with the strategic priorities. With the introduction of the colleges within our space management, layers of accountability, and our need to ensure we can effectively accommodate our projected growth, it's a great time to review the policy to make sure it remains an effective tool for decision-making. The policy is intended to create the foundation for a consistent, transparent, and equitable approach to space management, including how we make decisions around space that will support continued growth and sustainability. So why are we updating the policy now? So with the introduction of the One University operating model and the vision set out by SHAPE, there's both an opportunity and a need to shift our approach and clarify roles and responsibilities and decision-making authority. We have opportunities for greater consistency and improved sustainability in how space is allocated and how we use our infrastructure resources across the institution. SHAPE sets the vision to increase enrollment to 60,000 students by 2033. Integrated enrollment growth planning emphasizes the need for a coordinated and strategic approach, including how our physical space can accommodate expansion of this scale. So during our initial review of the space management policy and other related policies and procedures, several key areas of space management were identified, some of which are addressed in existing policy and others are addressed in standalone policies. So we also saw an opportunity to integrate several policies into the revised space management policy, creating a more streamlined and holistic approach. Next slide, please. So this slide, we're really trying to show the strategic alignment on the U of A mission and how that really feeds into what we build and how we build it and where the space management policy fits into that. So the revised policy is a key component of our planning landscape. It's a complement to strategic plans such as the Integrated Asset Management Strategy known as IAMS, which was refreshed last February, and built for purpose, the University Strategic Campus Plan, which is currently also being consulted on. Together, these strategic plans provide the foundation for effective infrastructure management. They'll support the teaching, learning, and research priorities of the institution through targeted infrastructure investments where it's needed to support growth. Drawing from our strategic plans, the space management policy principles will drive creation of welcoming, safe, engaging, and innovative spaces. They'll support our commitment to creating environments that progress the goals in each strategic plan and enhance the student experience on campus. We're working on a number of fronts to align our framework and streamline our approach to campus planning. This policy, the space management policy, is a foundational step that will inform our work to develop college-level master planning and space standards, as well as future projects. We're excited to host more conversations with you about initiatives such as Built for Purpose, which is scheduled for town halls next month as part of consultation. So key topics. So the first three key areas that we're looking at in the policy relate to the One University model, those being space management principles, scope and application, and authority, roles, and responsibilities. Space management principles and scope will guide decision-making and align with our growth objectives outlined in SHAPE and support integrated enrollment growth planning. I'll expand more on the principles here shortly. Authority, roles, and responsibilities will be reviewed to ensure they align with the college model and provide the foundation for space-related decision-making that's timely, fair, consultative, and transparent. The last three areas of the policy are primarily around changes to space, being acquisition and disposition of space, modifications to space, and use of space. These are currently addressed in other existing policies. To provide an example, the planning and renovation policy is part of space management. It guides how the university evaluates and delivers on requests to make changes to a space. When we look at renovating a space, we want to ensure that the changes are based on demonstrated need. They promote best use of space to ensure functionality, efficiency, future flexibility, and support growth. As another example, the facilities, floor, and room numbering policy is also a component of space management. It supports wayfinding through consistent and standardized floor and room numbering across campuses. As part of this review, considering the integration of these policies into the revised space management policy and shifting process-related items to appropriate procedures allows us to take a more streamlined approach. What's not in the policy? So we recognize many of you may have questions about how the policy affects you as an individual. So while the policy provides overarching guidance and the framework and authority and accountability structure to implement space management principles, it will not answer specific questions like what is the process for requesting a different lab, or what type of space will I be assigned, or how big would my workstation be. Processes and methods for assigning space, in other words, how space is allocated to departments and individuals, will be addressed in the space management procedure. But decisions around space assignments, such as individual office assignments, remain with unit heads. Next slide, please. All right, principles. So adherence to established set of principles is fundamental to ensuring our approach aligns with the strategic goals of the university and the core mission. We're aiming to leverage opportunities for optimized space use, allowing for growth and impact while improving financial and environmental sustainability. So not only will these principles be applied to space management, they'll also inform and guide campus planning and specific projects. Our goal is to be responsive and adaptable to the evolving needs of the university. Through consultation, we aim to define space management principles that promote shared stewardship, inclusivity, interdisciplinarity, equitable space distribution, and shared space use. Decision-making needs to be consultative, collaborative, and transparent. Okay, so Little Star is where we are here in the process. So to ensure that the space management policy is responsive to the needs of the university community, we're seeking input and feedback through a number of consultation activities. So town halls is folded. That's where we're at right now. This really marks the start of the process, and it's going to be followed by a series of roundtable discussions on specific topics. Input gathered from the consultation is going to be used to inform the revised draft policy and a what we heard document that'll be shared with the university community on the space management policy website. The draft policy is going to proceed through governance for review this spring. Following any edits, the policy will be submitted to governance for recommendation and board approval in the fall. So I'm going to turn it back over to Todd here for the discussion questions.
Well, thank you very much, Ashley. I think that was a good review of the work that's happening to revise the space management policy. We'd now like to open the floor for questions. As you're thinking about questions that you might want to ask the team, we've provided some examples of questions on this slide that we're going to be asking throughout the consultation process. Might just give you some things to think about there. So we will go to questions. A reminder, in Zoom, you can raise your hand in the bar on the bottom, and or you can put questions that you would like to ask in the chat. Don't be shy. Got about 100 people on the call. There must be some questions. There we go. Lise, am I saying that right? Yeah, please.
Hi.
Maybe you can introduce, maybe as people ask questions, maybe you can introduce who you are and where you're from in the university.
Sure. So my name is Liz Sack. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English and Film Studies. And so I'm sitting in on this meeting, and I'm actually really shocked to hear that we're in the consultation period, because we are in the already having the management policy, space policy enacted period. So we've just gone through a period of consolidation of space in our department. So I'm just confused about where the consultation actually happened. So let me just give you a quick background. As many people here know, there was a fire in the Humanities Center in December of 2023. We all had to, we couldn't get back into the building. For 6 months, we were homeless. And then when we were allowed back in the building in June, we were told that we had too much space and we had to consolidate. So we were basically booted out of a whole bunch of offices, put into one side of the building. And that's okay for tenure and tenure track professors because we got our full offices. I had to move my office begrudgingly. I liked my old office very much, but whatever, I was happy to move. The indignity was that ATS could do the lion's share of teaching increasingly at this university. And when we talk about the university growing its undergraduate enrollment, we know it's going to be back on the backs of ATS because we are not getting tenure track hires. So the ATS who had offices are now being shoved into, who had exterior offices with windows, are now on interior offices that they have to share with another ATS faculty person. They don't have private offices to meet with students. I think I heard teaching once in the preamble and the introduction, to meet privately with students to discuss their concerns and conduct their office hours. Flex spaces do not work. We can't be making up appointments to meet with students. That's not how students use our office hours. We have to encourage them to come and see us. We are the frontline workers when it comes to dealing with students and their concerns, as are our ATS. So let me put the question to you. Where did the consultation happen when this decision was made that impacts the ATS so fundamentally in my department? They are discouraged. They feel devalued. They don't feel like they were equitable, was used many times in the introduction. They do not feel like equitable partners in our department or at this university.
Thanks, Liz. Certainly appreciate the additional context that you've provided. I'll maybe say a couple things, and then Ashley, I'm happy to turn it over to you for for some of the details. So I think that there's a couple of things maybe happening in parallel here, Liz, and we know that the electrical fire, transformer fire in humanities was difficult for residents that building, and in different ways for teams like Ashley's and James in my portfolio that we're trying to manage the way through there. Not to mention leadership in the Faculty of Arts and the college, etc. So a difficult time. Glad that we were able to successfully get people back into the building. So all the while that is going on, and leadership collectively is taking a look at how to apply, I'll say, existing policies and move people back into the space and humanities. There's that piece where we're going. Space policy isn't new. It's not a new policy. We have a space policy. This is about the revisions to those policies. And so that's the consultation that we're in here. Thank you very much, of course, for your input. I know the team will have been frantically taking notes as you were providing that input, and we'll make sure that that gets captured. There'll also be other opportunities for further input, Liz. So continue to encourage yourself and your colleagues to engage in that. But Ashley, is there anything else in response to Liz's question that you would have?
No, I think Todd, just to reiterate, like that humanities was a really unique scenario where the electrical fire forced us to review the entire building and to find temporary locations for all of the staff and I know the RO in particular to accommodate moving the classrooms very quickly. So that's an extreme case when we have some of the other major events that happen, like flooding. It's usually more localized. It's a temporary measure on part of the building, not in the entirety of the building. And then the decision in terms of timing on and allowing people back into the building, making sure that was safe through the space management policy. That was where we did have involvement with the executive leadership up to the college model. So that's part of the consultation now, is making sure that the college is involved in some of those discussions. So that would have been the part, Liz, that was new. That was more around interim guidance of the space management policy and making sure that Marvin and the college is part of those conversations. But yeah, I appreciate all of your comments that you made.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, Ashley. Stephanie, I see your hand is up.
Good morning. Thank you. My name is Stephanie Russell. I'm the academic department manager for multiple departments within the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry. I just wanted to ask a question just kind of based off of Liz. So one of my departments moved out of the RTF. We also had to move into our existing footprint elsewhere on campus. But we're finding it difficult when it comes to supporting graduate students. So I wondered what consideration are being made for the graduate students. We have over 50 of them that are just within our department, not just ones that are with our PIs. And increasingly, a number of them need to have some kind of workstation because of the need for doing analytics or other kind of data outside of wet labs. Yet we don't have enough space for them, and we continuously get told that we just have to find space. And those of us that are in older buildings like Clinical Sciences building, which floods every couple of months, you know, doesn't have that opportunity where we're always having to displace them because of building issues. It's just really difficult to keep our graduate students motivated, and it's difficult for our PIs as well. We're getting to the point where PIs are actively telling us they're looking for other opportunities at other universities because duct tape on the lab floor because we don't want to, you know, do the appropriate renovations because of a loose tile or something is just not the way for us to attract world-class researchers or to retain graduate students in our programs. Yet we're continuously saying that we want to build more students. And I just don't see how that is feasible if we're not taking them into consideration when we're doing these space planning policies. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Ashley, I'm gonna hand over to you the specifics on the grad student piece. Thank you for your question, Stephanie, and your additional context. You know, I think what I would just add, and maybe should have done this at the beginning of the meeting, it's great for us to sort of hear some of the current challenges that are space related. In your question, I also hear a little bit around just overall space constraints, right? I'll say the box, as it were, that we're in, you know, the limitations that we have. As well, you know, I'm hearing maybe some deferred maintenance, overall maintenance issues that come in there. So all very, very important topics that are related in many ways, not specific to the space policy. But so I just want to sort of overarch that. We won't lose that feedback, though. Again, it'll all be captured. And so I just wanted to set the stage on that a bit. You know, I'd also like to note that there are, I think it's fair to say that there are certain parts of our institution whose box feels a little bit smaller and a little bit tighter, just due to sort of overall capacities. And so, you know, again, just want to acknowledge that. And, you know, I think your area may be within a bucket that I would consider to be a little bit more overly constrained. But Ashley, comments on the grad students in particular?
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. So grad students, and Joanne, I'll maybe start here and then ask you to jump in. So the policy itself doesn't go into the specific standards, the space standards. So it's really the foundational piece. And we are looking now also at what the space standards are across the institution. So right now we have guidelines. So if we're designing a space, for example, we would look at or renovations to a space, we look at making sure that it's in accordance to the existing guidelines, which across much of campus is a 2-to-1 ratio grad students to workstations. In particular, FOMD, because they've faced the types of space constraints that they have, they're more a 4-to-1 ratio. So that has been especially challenging where people have maybe moved from RTF, where there was a lot of dedicated offices, just the way that the building was laid out. They were moving into from what might have felt like an office standard into a smaller space. So that the relocation is often when it's really challenging for people because older buildings might not be at the existing space guidelines or standards that we have. That's really how we design renovations and projects moving forward. A good example of that would be we don't as soon as we adjust the guidelines or the standard, we don't renovate all of our buildings to that new guideline or standard. It just becomes how we work moving forward as things progress. So grad students in particular is one of the challenging areas that we know exists on campus, especially in terms of, like you mentioned, attracting grad students, retaining grad students, and and also communicating how those standards look when people are moving around campus and they might have been in a space for a really long time. And they're moving into maybe a new space that has a lot more shareable or bookable spaces. We found that also with people who, example, work in ECA as a building, it has a lot more shareable spaces and touchdown spaces compared to some of our older buildings on North Campus. Joanne, can you maybe add to that around the space standards?
Yeah, I think you've hit a lot of the important information there. So to reiterate a couple of pieces, one is that by working on the space management policy, it helps us to set the tone to navigate as we go forward to future tools. And some of those future tools include, we have one that will be developing formulas for us to predict space as we go forward. And then the other is actually getting down to space standards. In that work, we are doing a lot of benchmarking across other institutions. We will also obviously be opening up to consultation here at the university. But one of the things we do know in our work, which Todd actually did a great job of mentioning, is some of the challenges that we have of inconsistency across the institution. Some space has and is living in larger footprints, and other spaces like what you're describing are living in challenged footprints. And so that's part of what the policy helps us to look at and start that conversation on, is how do we be more equitable and fair and consistent across the application, across the institution, and the consideration of how we can handle space differently. So with respect to grad students, definitely you're in a challenged area, and we're aware of that. And then we also are aware of other areas where maybe we're going to have to challenge a little more as we go forward. But it's a good opportunity to have the conversation and to hear the concerns. Thanks.
Thanks, Joanne, for that additional comments. And Stephanie, thanks so much. We'll, again, the team is capturing all of this. And so I appreciate both the question and the additional context. Julie, been a while since I've seen you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, Julie McClellan, Faculty General Manager in Law. My question is about the space data inventory that was undertaken in 2022 and 2023. Was that used to inform the new policy, or how was that information being used?
Ashley, I'll kick that right over to you. I will just say that the policy is obviously in consultation for development now, but we're taking all data sources into consideration. But Ashley, do you want to talk specifically about that inventory?
Yeah, and I'll get Joanne to go into more details, because I started around the time that we were presenting the findings and the summaries of that survey information, Julie. So that data has been shared back with down to the colleges, and any questions on it to actually go in and make sure that it was accurate and can help inform more unit head department information and understanding of how space is being used. We don't really, the policy itself is the overarching principles and decision-making authority, not the specifics around utilization or the stats or figures that we'd be going into. But Joanne, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the reason we undertook the inventory was twofold. With the reorganization of the institution, how our space was allocated, to whom it was allocated, had shifted. So as an example, our campus rec services had actually shifted from reporting to the faculty of KSR to our central department. And so in order to capture some of that information accurately, that was one of the main reasons we started the inventory, was to ensure that our space was actually kept up to date in our system. The second advantage to the inventory was so many people had changed positions. It gave an opportunity for everyone to become more aware of the space that we have here on campus, which is actually meant as the kickoff for all of the work that you're going to see coming out as we go forward. So here with the space management policy, a better understanding of the space that we have on campus. As we go forward to those space formulas and the space standards, then there's also a better understanding of the spaces that we have on campus. And then as we go into those college master plans, the built for a purpose, that consideration of the space that we have. So it was to help all of us as an institution get a better insight into the spaces that we currently have on campus and how we're using them, so that we are all stepping forward with a more informed approach.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Julie. Great question. Greg, maybe just start with who you are, where you're from.
My name is Greg Funk. I'm a professor in the Department of Physiology and chair. So I'm in the Faculty of Medicine. I'm in the Medical Science building, which is one of the older buildings. And so I just want to start off with thanks for opening this up and the chance to chat about this today. It is an ongoing thing, and as pointed out earlier, we've been undergoing sort of space revision policies for quite a while. So I wasn't clear where this new one fit in, and your presentation today is at such a high level. I'm not even sure where to start asking questions about how it's going to move forward, because as has happened in this conversation, part of the problem here is deferred maintenance, and where we have space, is it really occupiable space? I'm in the 7th floor in MSB, and we have a couple of labs that are empty right now, but I don't want to put anybody in them because they constantly leak. And, so one of the labs next to them, they're waiting for a leak. So their major equipment, they've built tarps over top of the expensive equipment. So when it does leak, their equipment isn't destroyed. So, it is, I guess, really getting down to the nitty-gritty of how this is going to roll out at the level of departments and space allocation. I like the comments you had earlier where you're actually going to be talking about space allocation policy, who gets, or like what's appropriate for given users. And existing space policy doesn't include undergraduate researchers. They're viewed as, I think the word is transient. But I think many of us probably have undergraduate researchers in our labs for up to 2 to 3 years, because they start early and they stay for summers, and having a footprint or a place for them is a really big deal as well, just like our graduate students or postdocs. So I don't know, I'm just really not clear on where this is right now. It seems very much at the beginning, and I want to provide input, but I can't really extract what's going on in terms of how space is going to be allocated with respect to defining what space is occupiable, and I'm just very confused as to where this leaves, or where this is going, and what its overall objectives are. Sorry,
Yeah.
rambling.
No, that was helpful, Greg. And, I would just add to your comment, if you don't know where to start, I think you've just done a really good job of starting, right? So that type of input that you provide to us is really helpful, particularly on the concept of the undergrad researchers, right? We've heard from a couple of folks with some great feedback that happened to be from FOMD. I maybe wasn't as direct earlier. FOMD is one of the areas that has a pretty constrained box right now. We hear that quite frequently. And the medical services building that you talk about, any consolation for those of you from FOMD, Dean Hemmelgarn talks to me frequently, as well as Ashley, about some of the building envelope and flooding challenges that we have in that building. So you're right. There's a number of things that get connected here. We've talked about deferred maintenance. You've just touched on another good one, right? So there's the space policy. And there's the space standards, and John talked a little bit about that earlier, but they're very connected, obviously, and need to be a little bit separate in their packages, as it were, if I could put it that way. But Ashley or Joanne, anything that you would add for Greg?
Greg, I really appreciated all your comments. The piece about maintenance, so maintenance policy is one of the policies that falls under space management that we could look at rolling in. What you were speaking to is making me think about maybe perhaps in our principles, looking at a core principle of vacant space when we are so constrained due to lack of maintenance, should not be acceptable. That's not the acceptable standard that we should be working towards. So I think that was where my mind was going when you were making some of the comments, is how can we look at some of that input as it relates to the principles around making sure that the space that we have has to be usable. There has to be a path towards it being the quality of space that we want for researchers and students. So I really appreciated those comments. And yeah, if you have any thoughts on how you would like to see that, please feel free to send it over to us.
Okay, I will. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. That was very helpful. Trish, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm following up on Greg because I think he touched on some of the things that seem a little puzzling to me. I'm Vice Dean of the School of Business. Sorry. I think that we're also kind of faced with what do we do as a growing faculty? And so we have increased numbers of students, which means increased numbers of staff, et cetera. And that causes us to not quite know how we fit into the policy anymore. And so the policy applies to finding classrooms that'll fit big numbers of students and not having enough on campus. So I guess when you talk about this fitting with shape, that's the crunch for us. Is what are the policies going forward when we're supposed to grow, when a lot of people are struggling right now to even manage with the space that we have? And I think this point about maintenance is also huge. And the having resources to do the maintenance is one piece, and then actually getting the maintenance done takes incredibly long time. We've been in a waiting list for quite a while on changes that already the money is in place, but we still can't get it done. So timing and resources, and then thinking ahead for how do we honestly grow given the constraints that we have. So I'm not sure how that fits into this policy, but that's what we're living with right now.
Yeah, thanks so much, Trish. I would maybe offer up just a couple of comments. So SHAPE is our our North Star, as it were, right? It's our long-term strategic plan. And so you've really just touched on what is the real, I mean, there's many reasons why this is important, but why do these things need to be linked, right? So our space needs to be able to accommodate that growth. Now, a bit of the dichotomy that we have is that we have areas that are constrained. You've just talked about business, right, that are feeling constraints. Yet overall, we have, and I hesitate to put this out because it doesn't solve problems like the one that you're mentioning, but we still have one of the largest, I'll put in sort of parentheses, the largest physical footprint per capita of any U15 in Canada. So on one side, we've got a very expensive footprint because it's big. In other areas, it's a challenge to align with things like shape and growth because of the constraints that we're seeing in some areas. And so not to get into it too much here today, but you're all going to start hearing more about our campus strategic plan. So it's being called Built for Purpose, University of Alberta's strategic campus plan, and it's going to take a look out sort of that 20-year phase, right? So what are we going to be 20 years from now? And some of what we're talking about here today is going to roll into that plan, and we'll be able to provide that. Now, that's not to suggest that you're not going to get an answer to that question for 20 years, obviously, but again, just to highlight that, and it's a learning that I've had since I've taken on this subject within my portfolio, is there's a lot of things that link here, and we're working to try to provide a way to show that to campus. And so you're going to see some new stuff coming out soon. But specific to your question, Ashley, what would you add?
Yeah, I just Tricia, appreciate your comments. I think business actually is a great example around the new Masters in Analytics program, and that knowing that program was advancing to go forward, we were working with the faculty on renovation plans in order to accommodate that and what would be needed. And that is when we're looking at some of the interim guidance that we had on space management, that was actually one of the first projects through there where faculty wanted to look at renovations of an existing space to allow for growth of that new program. And so we worked with them on that in parallel with getting approval of the program to make sure it aligned with the need and the growth planning. Money was there, and that one's on schedule. So the renovation is going to happen ahead of that program starting next fall. So I think that's actually a really good example. The timing of renovations, I think sometimes is always hard because people don't necessarily factor in the timing of the planning, design, and the procurement if we have to go out and contract out some of that work. But there is some other work, I think, happening in business that we've been working with because it unfortunately stalled out. So I'm happy to follow up specifically with you on some of those other projects and just make sure that you know where they're at, that were smaller in nature, I think washrooms and stuff in particular.
Thank you, Trish.
Thanks.
All right. We need some hands. What else is on people's minds? JB Murray 2. Sorry, not sure who that is, but yeah, go ahead. Maybe introduce yourself if you would and where you're from first.
Hi, thank you for this. It's really interesting and I think it's really important. My name's Jason Murray. I'm a psychologist. I'm the Director of Counseling and Clinical Services. I just want to speak a little more about what I think is the importance of the conversation between space design and use and the overall plan. Because what I'm hearing sort of sounds like we want to create a policy and a plan for our use of our space and have that then other people then solve how exactly do we use it at the faculty department unit level. You guys come up with the standard for the offices for your folks, not us. And I think there are important considerations for how spaces need to be designed for service providers. I'm thinking about folks like the physicians and pharmacists who work supporting thousands of students on campus. Those spaces need to be, there is a standard for how those spaces should be built and designed, and that standard should talk upwards to the policy, because otherwise you'll give them not enough space and they'll have poor or not enough space as they already have, and we'll be just circling this conversation again. I do think too that similar considerations are there for other kinds of roles and things on campus. So I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty details of it because it's probably boring for most people on this call to think about that. But we have encountered situations where we're looking to place psychologists in locations where people want to give them offices that aren't confidential, private, secure. We're having difficulties with how we would renovate those offices to make them confidential, private, secure. And questions around like making sure the office is appropriate for the kind of work that we would do as psychologists, especially when we're working with pretty seriously unwell people at times. The approach is sort of like, this is the best we can give you. It should be good enough for you. Stop asking for more. And I just don't find that supportive, and most of my colleagues don't find that supportive of the whole idea of the new strategic plan and things like that. So of course, we have to acknowledge and exist in the limits that are there. Those are real limits that don't change just because we wish them to. But I think the conversation around the importance of purpose-built spaces for purpose-built purposes is really important. And I hope that gets reflected a little more in the policy. Otherwise, all you're doing is just downloading the figuring out how to squeeze people into a space work to people, to managers and associate deans and others who are then going to be struggling to do that, I think, when there's a particular standard that they're trying to meet for their employees and for the students that they're serving, right? That's why we're here. That may mean that the work is actually not doable or more difficult, or in some cases, not as confidential and secure as we really would like it to be. So thank you for listening, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason. You've touched on a few good points there that we'll certainly take away. Ashley, you might have something to add. I will just say, and you alluded to it, Jason, is a couple things. So first of all, sessions like this are intended to start that meaningful sort of two-way conversation on these things. Right now, we recognize that doesn't end when we're done here at 11 o'clock. It doesn't end once the policy's in place, the standards are reaffirmed, and those sorts of things. Those meaningful discussions have to take place at levels throughout the organization, right? Because Ashley and I and her team can't sort of do it all, as it were, and there's a leadership accountability at faculty dean, at FGM, at chair, et cetera, et cetera. And you alluded to it. I'll just emphasize, right? We do have some constraints, right? Physical footprint is one, again, in some areas. Financial is another, right? University has ongoing financial constraints, but the conversation, I think, and you've talked about this, I think the conversation is really important, that engagement, and really hearing each other, and recognize that not all things are created equal, right? What an administrator might need for an office, I agree, is not the same for what a psychologist might need for student sessions. It's not the same as, I think you used pharmacy as an example, right? So our policy and our standards do need to consider that. So thank you very much. Ashley, team, anything that you would add specifically?
I don't have anything to add, Todd. I just get your point about like the purpose. Like I think that was maybe Jason, one of the earlier comments we had on certain accredited programs as well, having different needs than others. So I don't know, Joanna, if you wanted to add anything specific.
Yeah, it's a very fair comment that you're saying. I guess one of the things that I would hope as we work together going forward at the implementation points of projects is, Ashley alluded to that earlier, is a lot of what we're producing here are the tools by which we start those decisions and we start that process. But it is always the intent when we get to the point of implementing a project that there would be consultation to actually determine how best to align what those tools are to the actual need of the group that's being affected. So this policy, standards, formulas, they're not meant to be a one size fits all. They are meant to provide some of those guidance and clarity as we go forward. And again, so speaking to this being the space management policy consultation, this is about how those decisions are made, right? This is about who has the authority. So appreciate what you're saying. Appreciate your comments about informing more the bottom up. And I think those are comments we can take back as we consider how best to apply the policy going forward. But thank you for your comments.
So thanks again, Jason. I'm gonna just refer to the chat box here and try to deal with a couple things in the chat box. So Connie, thanks for your question. I think the short answer to your question there is yes. The examples that you provide may suggest sort of a usage of a common space, but I think that our space policy and standards need to take a look at all activity and ensure that we are, to the best of our abilities, facilitating all of those core operational needs. Greg, to your ad here about growth, yeah, I think we've touched on that. Not to be overly provocative, because we could probably spend an additional hour just on this topic alone, but I know if Verna were here, she would talk about the need to do things potentially differently, right? So as we continue to grow, is it the right model to still assume that we're going to do all of our teaching and labs in a physical together presence? Or what can we learn from other leading universities, Canada, North America, around the globe, on how they're using technology for it? I know she's seen some stuff on virtual labs that sounds quite exciting. So again, not to take us down that path today, but just another thought that we need to potentially consider. And then Liz, thanks for adding that back in relations to Jason's point around just the space crunch, and making sure that we're getting the most practical and appropriate use out of our space as well. I'll just pause there, Ashley. I don't know on any of those three comments in the chat if there's anything that you would add or that I got wrong.
No, not that you got wrong. I think, Corinne, on your comment, we have heard a bit from students, in particular, a desire to see more like spaces that serve cross purposes. So there were some. An example would be department scheduled classrooms, especially during COVID. Some of those became available more as group study. How do they retain the function of being available for group study? as well as being available as small classrooms. So those are examples where there's still different considerations of how we use spaces for multiple purposes. And that right now, the way that the space allocation and some of those decisions are being made isn't really set up for success to allow that to happen. So that's something that we are aware of and tracking. But that was the other example I thought of when I saw your piece on convocation and recruitment. If you have more details on that, please feel free to send it over to us, like the specifics of what the challenge is.
Great, thanks, Ashley. Liz, go ahead.
How are footprints determined? So when I hear the term footprint, and I don't know whether that was done in the previous space inventory or that's something you're doing now. So when you sort of say that one place, one department or unit or whatever has a larger footprint, too much space, and another one doesn't, are we taking into account hallway? Like I don't know how that metric is come up with. So if you can clarify that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, Ashley, I'll look to you or the team to sort of provide the specifics. That's that would be in the standards, I think, typically speaking. But yeah, Ashley, what do you?
Yeah, so there's previously a lot of the documents that you would have seen would have been around general space programs. We used to do institutionally general space programs that would look at what are the needs down to the faculty level for space, and then how does that relate to the existing space guidelines that we have. So when we look at projects now, because we haven't updated any of those general space programs, what we're doing is moving forward with college level master planning that will go into the needs of each faculty as well in terms of what the growth projections are related to shape. So that'll look at, based, like Joanne said, it's not an end all be all, but as a tool, what should we expect a footprint based on the needs that are identified for space by the various faculties and colleges. So that's work that's happening moving forward. And the work that is specific examples. So we talked a bit about the business example around the new Masters of Analytics program. So what we did there is we look at a functional space program where we actually have a consultant working with the faculty on what are the specific needs for the space, how would those needs translate into a footprint of space, make sure that it then fits, we test fit it within the space to know that we can do the renovation and it'll meet the needs of the growth. And then from there, the project advances to design. So there's the specific stages, and I'll maybe have Joanne add to that in a different way if that helps a bit, just to make sure that we're capturing the needs as identified by the faculty in this case.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. So the basis of the work that we do aligns with the staff and students involved in the faculty, and that usually translates to an amount of space. Over time, two things change. One is how space is designed and what the current trends are, what the needs are for the use of that space. Those all impact the volume and type of space we would use to inform a decision like that. Then the other thing that happens is the group itself may shrink or grow. And so we will often hear from a group that has grown, but we seldom hear from a group that has shrunk. And so what will happen is that group will be sitting in oversubscribed space. So when we talk about a footprint, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. So either the group has shrunk and they're still sitting in the same footprint because we just don't have the means to go and check everybody all the time, or the design or intent of that space has changed over the decades that they have existed in that space. So some of our buildings, as you know, were built in the 50s, 70s. It has changed as we're navigating going forward. And so that's where some of the challenges are, the discrepancies might be in footprint.
I found that extremely unhelpful, to be honest. I have no idea what you're talking about because you're all talking in generalities. You're like spaces, groups, footprints. I'm sorry, that was like not helpful at all. So let me ask you a very concrete question. Is there a size that you have determined that a human being can occupy as an office that is acceptable? Like, is there a minimum? Is there a maximum? I would think that that's a baseline that you could be able to answer and not talk about vague spaces and groups and footprints.
So yes, Liz, there are space standards.
Okay.
And those are related to this policy.
Okay.
And correct me if I'm wrong, the space standards are public information, correct?
So that's the trick, is that as an institution, we have used some baseline standards, but we don't have a published set. And so that is part of the work that we're doing as we go forward, is using this as an opportunity. Once we have the policy in place, once we have the tools in place, is to actually look at our space standards. And that, of course, would be something that would be publishable. Yes.
Okay, so you don't have that now.
We do have what we have used historically. This is an opportunity to look at it again. So this is part of the feedback we're receiving, is hearing some of the concerns that are out there and recognizing some of the challenges we have as an institution and how we may need to relook at how we use space and to determine a set of standards that we can actually together as an institution understand better going forward.
Okay, so let me offer a hypothetical situation. You have an office that was designed for one in the 1970s, say in a hypothetical building like the Humanities Center, and it was very purposely built for one person. And now there could be a space policy in which you say, well, that was 1970s standards. By 2024, we're going to say that this can fit 4 people. That's a possibility?
So that's a very fair question. So again, to separate the policy from the standards, we won't ever have a policy that says that. The policy is talking about how decisions are made, and then that informs the procedures of the steps taken to make the decisions. And then the standard is its own concept used to help inform, to your point, how large should an office be. Again, as I mentioned earlier, over time, spaces have changed. So absolutely, a 1970s office by today's standards is definitely going to be, there's a high likelihood that it's going to be considered oversized. Are we going to come in and change that tomorrow? No, absolutely not. We couldn't afford to do that. But as we move forward on projects, that is something we have always done across the institution. This isn't new now. This is something we've always done, is try to use space more efficiently as we go forward.
Okay, so I'm trying to understand, just one follow-up question, standards and policies. So you could have a standard, but it wouldn't necessarily become policy.
Policy is an overarching document of which is supported by the standards. Sorry if we haven't made that clear. So again, there's a number of things related, but Liz, if I can, I think that you have some questions, I think, that are very specific to the repopulation of humanities.
Sure.
And so I'm going to ask the team to follow up with yourself. I suggest we have Eva Glancy in that conversation.
Okay.
And anybody else that the team thinks is appropriate, you might want to include Robert. And let's see if we can get you some answers. But I really appreciate, again, Liz, the context that you've provided. Anthony, I'm gonna go to you quickly if we can. And I'm rapidly approaching our time commitment of 11. So we'll try to answer your question, Anthony, and then we'll wrap up. You're on mute, Anthony.
Thanks. Sorry about that. I was so engaged in listening. Anthony Cornish, I'm over in the Department of Biological Sciences, Faculty of Science. Just a quick follow-up, I guess, maybe clarification from what Liz was saying. Back in March 2020, you guys developed a space management overview document that did lay out some base sort of space standards. I'm just wondering if that document is still used as a guideline, or is it being refreshed and revisited as part of, I guess, not this process, because that is a little lower down on the totem pole, but is that document still being used as a guideline until something new is brought in, or is there already something completely different to be used? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was a document that we created in a previous iteration of our organizational structure on how we could interact with our clients to better serve the consultation process. So it outlined things like roles and responsibilities, et cetera. And you're correct. One of the appendices in there was a generic idea of some standards that we use and guide our work as we go forward. Until such time as that changes, those standards are still what we are using as we go forward, but they specifically only relate to office and workspace. They don't apply to larger other initiatives like classrooms, et cetera. And just for other people on the call. And then the second thing I'll say is, yes, that we would look at reworking that as we go forward, because we've had some organizational shifts across everywhere, but especially within our own shop, so that we could better inform how we work together going forward.
Okay, thank you very much. That helps.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Anne.
Anthony. Just maybe to add to what Joanne just said, and then one of the other things that we are hearing is that inconsistency where the guidelines being used by certain faculties are different than others. So as part of a refresh of that, looking to bring in consistency where it makes sense, not like consistency just because, but just really understanding where the differences are. And I think we heard in particular from FOMD where their guidelines are quite different from the base guidelines we have.
Okay, great. Thank you again.
Yeah, thanks. And Joanne, maybe that document that you mentioned is the one that I was thinking when I was thinking of my response earlier. But you know, one of the things I think that is again made clear here today, right, is there is a need and there's a desire across the community for this conversation. And I think it really punctuates the importance of us moving through, you know, the space policy review, and you know, continuing to align our standards with that policy. So thank you, everyone. We're just going to wrap up quickly. Ashley, I'm going to ask you to talk about next steps quickly, if we can throw that slide up, please.
Okay, so we've got our second town hall is coming up Thursday at 2:30. The content is going to be a repeat of this one, but obviously discussion will be different, questions will be different. So if you know anyone that has an interest in attending, please let them know. The registration for the town hall is still open, or they can just join directly into the Zoom link on our space management policy website. Then next steps are to commence roundtable discussions that'll be more specific topic areas to inform the first draft of the revised policy. And as we mentioned earlier, we're going to be compiling a what we heard report to outline all the feedback that will also be posted to the space management policy website. We've created the generic strategic infrastructure plan and partnerships email address that's noted on this slide, so please feel free to send anything to that. We also have included this email on our website if you need to find it at a later date.
Excellent. Thank you, Ashley. Trish, just want to acknowledge your comment in the chat box as well. We'll definitely do so. Thank you all. I know it's hard to carve out an hour from your day. Apologies, I've run us a minute or two over. Do really appreciate the input, feedback provided. I know that the team has captured it all, and as we continue to move forward with this over the coming weeks and months, we'll make sure that it's all incorporated. Do watch for further updates and opportunities to continue to be engaged in this important conversation. I hope you all have a great rest of your week, and thank you for joining.